She called it, "One last night with my ex for closure." Called the bank. The notification sound from Melissa's laptop had been going off every few minutes while she was in the shower, and I glanced over thinking it might be something work-related that needed immediate attention. Instead, I saw a string of Instagram messages from someone named Dylan, and the preview text made my blood run cold. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night, just like old times." I'd been married to Melissa for 12 years, and I thought I knew everything about her digital life, but apparently there was an entire conversation thread I'd never seen before. The messages went back 6 weeks, filled with heart emojis and inside jokes that felt uncomfortably intimate for someone I'd never heard her mention. When I scrolled up, I discovered Dylan was her high school boyfriend who'd recently moved to Denver for a teaching position, and for the past month and a half, Melissa had been helping him get settled, while telling me she was assisting her college roommate Sarah with apartment hunting. The lies were elaborate and detailed. Fake addresses for apartments they were supposedly viewing, fabricated stories about Sarah's picky requirements, even complaints about how exhausting it was spending entire Saturdays driving around looking at places that never seemed quite right. I sat there staring at her laptop screen, reading messages about furniture shopping trips and late-night video calls where they caught up on old times. And I realized that every weekend she'd been mysteriously busy, every evening she'd been texting someone while claiming it was work, every time she'd been unusually happy after running errands alone. It had all been about Dylan. The worst part wasn't even the emotional connection they were rebuilding, it was how casually she'd been lying to my face for weeks, creating this entire fictional narrative about helping Sarah while actually rekindling something with a guy she'd dated in high school. When Melissa came out of the bathroom wrapped in her towel, humming some song I didn't recognize, I closed the laptop and waited for her to get dressed before bringing it up. "So how's Sarah's apartment hunting going?" I asked, watching her face carefully. "Oh, you know how it is," she said, not missing a beat. "Still haven't found anything in her price range, but we're making progress." The ease with which she lied, the complete lack of hesitation or guilt in her voice, told me everything I needed to know about what our marriage had become. "Funny thing," I said quietly, "because I just saw some messages from Dylan on your laptop, and it sounds like you've been helping him furniture shop, not Sarah apartment hunt." The color drained from her face, but instead of remorse or explanation, what I got was instant rage. "You were snooping through my private messages?" she demanded, her voice rising to a pitch I rarely heard. "How dare you invade my privacy like that?" She went on the attack immediately, accusing me of being controlling and paranoid, claiming Dylan was just an old friend who needed help adjusting to a new city, insisting there was nothing inappropriate about maintaining friendships with people from her past. "It's not about maintaining friendships," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "It's about lying to me for 6 weeks about where you've been and who you've been with." She doubled down, getting angrier and more defensive, claiming I was reading too much into innocent conversations and that my jealousy was becoming a serious problem in our marriage. "You're acting like I'm having an affair," she said with perfect indignation. "He's going through a tough time adjusting to Denver, and I'm just being a good friend." But good friends don't require elaborate cover stories, and helping someone adjust to a new city doesn't involve late-night video calls that she'd been hiding from me for over a month. Over the next 2 weeks, Melissa's justifications became increasingly elaborate and psychologically manipulative. "Dylan's going through a really dark period," she explained one evening after I'd caught her on another late-night call. "He's dealing with depression and anxiety about the move, and I'm one of the few people who really understands his background." She made it sound like a humanitarian mission, as if helping her ex-boyfriend through his emotional struggles was some kind of moral obligation that superseded our marriage vows. I started paying closer attention to her behavior, and the patterns became impossible to ignore. She'd developed sudden interests in new music that coincidentally matched Dylan's Spotify playlists, which she'd somehow started following. Her work expenses had increased dramatically, and when I looked at the receipts, they included items like expensive cologne, artisanal coffee, and a leather messenger bag that definitely wasn't for our home office. "I thought that bag was for your laptop," I mentioned casually. "Oh, it didn't fit right, so I gave it to someone who could use it more," she replied without making eye contact. The someone was obviously Dylan, and the pattern of gift-giving disguised as personal purchases was becoming clear. Her work schedule also conveniently aligned with his free time. She'd suddenly developed important conference calls that happened to occur during his lunch breaks and after his teaching day ended. When I suggested we grab dinner after her late conference call one Thursday, she got flustered and claimed the client was on Pacific time, so the call wouldn't end until well past dinner time. But when I checked her computer later that night, I found a deleted Skype conversation with Dylan that had lasted 3 hours, filled with the kind of intimate conversation that had nothing to do with helping someone adjust to a new city. The breaking point came when I discovered a second phone hidden in her purse, a cheap prepaid device that contained voice messages so personal and romantic that I felt sick reading the transcripts. "I miss the way you used to make me laugh," one message said. "Being married sometimes feels like wearing a costume that doesn't fit anymore." When I confronted her about the burner phone, instead of shame or apology, I got pure fury. "You went through my purse?" she screamed. "This is exactly why I can't talk to you about anything personal anymore. You're suffocating me." She threatened to pack her bags and move out if I didn't stop stalking her every move and monitoring her friendships like some kind of prison warden. The gaslighting was textbook perfect. Suddenly I was the problem for discovering her lies, and she was the victim of my unreasonable expectations. "I can't live like this," she declared dramatically. "If you can't trust me to maintain healthy friendships, then maybe we need to seriously reconsider this marriage." She even started questioning my memory of our previous conversations, claiming she'd already explained things that she definitely hadn't, or insisting that I was twisting her words when I repeated back exactly what she'd said. The manipulation was so smooth and practiced that I started to wonder if this was her first time creating elaborate cover stories for inappropriate relationships, or if I'd just finally caught her in one she couldn't talk her way out of. 3 days before our planned anniversary weekend in Aspen, Melissa approached me with what she called an important conversation about our future. She'd been unusually calm and collected all morning, which should have been my first warning sign, because Melissa was never calm when she wanted something significant. We were having coffee on our back deck when she launched into what sounded like a prepared speech about therapeutic closure and unresolved emotional baggage that was apparently preventing her from being fully present in our marriage. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she began, using the kind of measured tone people use when they're about to deliver devastating news. "And I realize that I can't move forward in our relationship until I get proper closure with Dylan." She explained that she'd been researching relationship psychology online and had discovered that unfinished business from past relationships creates emotional blockages that prevent people from fully committing to their current partners. The way she presented it, spending a weekend with her ex-boyfriend was actually a form of couples therapy that would ultimately benefit our marriage. "Dylan rented this cabin up in the mountains for the weekend," she said, watching my face carefully for my reaction. "It would be the perfect place for us to have the deep conversations we need to finally put our past to rest." The clinical language she was using made the whole thing sound like a medical procedure instead of what it actually was, a request for sanctioned infidelity. She had charts and articles printed out from psychology websites about closure rituals and emotional healing, as if enough pseudoscientific terminology could transform a romantic weekend getaway with her ex into some kind of therapeutic intervention. "You're asking me to give you permission to spend a weekend alone with Dylan," I said, wanting to make sure I understood exactly what she was proposing. "I'm asking you to support me in taking care of some unfinished emotional business so that I can be the wife you deserve," she replied smoothly. When I told her absolutely not, that the entire concept was ridiculous and disrespectful, her mask slipped completely. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she snapped. "Your jealousy and possessiveness are preventing me from doing the personal growth work I need to do." According to her twisted logic, I was being emotionally unavailable and controlling by refusing to let her spend a romantic weekend with another man. She actually used the phrase, "You're holding me back from achieving emotional maturity," with a straight face, as if personal growth required sleeping in a mountain cabin with her high school boyfriend. "If you really loved me," she continued, "you'd want me to resolve these issues so I can be fully present in our marriage." The manipulation was breathtaking. Somehow my refusal to enable her affair had become evidence that I didn't care about our relationship's long-term success. She even suggested that my insecurity was the real problem in our marriage, and that if I could just trust her to handle this like an adult, we'd come back stronger than ever. The entire conversation felt like watching someone try to convince me that up was down and black was white, all while maintaining perfect eye contact and speaking in the reasonable tone of someone explaining basic math to a child. The moment Melissa left for work that Thursday morning, still convinced she could wear me down about her closure weekend, I went into full strategic mode. I called the Aspen Resort and canceled our $4,200 anniversary reservation, citing a family emergency to avoid cancellation fees. Then I drove straight to our bank and liquidated our joint investment accounts, transferring every penny to a new account that only had my name on it. 12 years of shared financial planning disappeared into my personal control within 2 hours, and the bank manager, who'd known us for years, looked uncomfortable but processed the transactions without question. Next call was to my brother-in-law Marcus, who happened to be one of the best divorce attorneys in Denver, and who'd been warning me about Melissa's high-maintenance tendencies since our engagement party. "Jake, I've been waiting for this call for about 5 years, he said when I explained the situation. "Let me guess, she wants to work things out while keeping all her options open?" Marcus had seen this pattern before, and he moved fast. Emergency divorce papers filed by noon, with a request for immediate separation of assets and a restraining order preventing her from accessing our joint accounts. I spent the afternoon methodically documenting everything. Screenshots of every conversation I'd found between Melissa and Dylan, copies of credit card statements showing her mysterious purchases, even photos of the burner phone and its contents before she could delete anything. By the time she got home from work, I'd changed every password on every account we shared, removed her from our car insurance and health insurance policies, and had legal papers ready to be served at her office the next morning. "Surprise," I said when she walked through the door to find her belongings neatly packed in suitcases by the front entrance. "I've decided to support your personal growth by giving you all the space you need to work through your emotional issues." The look on her face was absolutely priceless, a mixture of shock, rage, and dawning realization that her little manipulation game had just blown up in spectacular fashion. "You can't be serious," she stammered, staring at the packed bags like they might disappear if she looked hard enough. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Maybe Dylan's mountain cabin is available," I suggested helpfully. "You know, for all that important closure work you need to do." When she tried to access our joint credit card to book a hotel, the transaction was declined, and that's when the full scope of her new reality started to sink in. She began crying, then screaming, then alternating between threats and desperate bargaining, but I just handed her the divorce papers and explained that she had 24 hours to collect anything else she needed from the house. The meltdown was epic, but I'd prepared for it by having Marcus's associate waiting outside to serve as a witness and ensure everything stayed legal and documented. "You're destroying 12 years of marriage over nothing," she sobbed. "This isn't nothing," I replied calmly. "This is you asking permission to cheat on me and then acting like I'm the problem for saying no." The next evening, while I was enjoying a peaceful dinner alone for the first time in months, Marcus called to report that Melissa had tried to use our credit cards at some expensive restaurant with Dylan, and the public embarrassment of having multiple cards declined in front of her date had apparently triggered another complete emotional breakdown. She called the restaurant manager, then the credit card company, then started screaming at Dylan about how this was all his fault, Marcus said, barely containing his laughter. The guy apparently left her there to figure out how to pay for her own meal. What followed was 2 months of increasingly desperate manipulation that would have been impressive if it wasn't so pathetic. Melissa launched a full-scale campaign to turn our mutual friends and family against me, spinning elaborate stories about my alleged financial abuse and controlling behavior. She called my mother crying, claiming I'd trapped her in an abusive marriage and cut off all her access to money without warning, conveniently leaving out the part about her emotional affair and weekend cabin request. She told our friends that I'd suffered some kind of mental breakdown and was punishing her for having male friends, painting herself as the victim of my sudden psychological instability. The most creative story involved her claiming I'd been secretly monitoring her phone calls and emails for months, using her discovery of Dylan as evidence of my paranoid surveillance rather than acknowledging that she'd been lying and sneaking around. She even showed up at my CrossFit gym one morning, causing a scene in front of everyone I worked out with, sobbing about how I'd destroyed her life over nothing, and begging me to go to couples counseling. When that didn't work, she tried ambushing me at my favorite coffee shop, sitting at my usual table with red-rimmed eyes and a stack of relationship self-help books, clearly hoping I'd feel guilty and sit down for a conversation about reconciliation. The barista, who knew us both, looked so uncomfortable that I just ordered my coffee to go and left without acknowledging her presence. Her next tactic was involving my family, showing up at my mother's house with a handwritten letter detailing her transformation and commitment to rebuilding our marriage. My mom, who'd always been polite but never particularly warm toward Melissa, listened to the whole sob story and then asked one simple question. So you wanted to spend a romantic weekend with another man, and you're upset that Jake said no? That shut down the family manipulation pretty quickly. When direct approaches failed, Melissa got creative with social media stalking, creating fake Instagram and Facebook accounts to monitor my activities and send anonymous messages begging for another chance. I started getting texts from random numbers with messages like, "I know you still love me," and "Dylan meant nothing, you're the only one I want," which was both creepy and pathetic. Marcus found the whole thing entertaining and suggested we document everything for potential restraining order purposes, but honestly, I just felt sorry for her at that point. The final blow to her emotional stability came when Dylan, apparently spooked by the divorce papers and the restaurant scene, blocked her on everything and disappeared back to whatever rock he'd crawled out from under. According to her sister, who still talked to me occasionally, Melissa had a complete meltdown when she realized her great love had been nothing more than a fantasy that evaporated the moment real consequences appeared. She keeps saying she threw away everything real for something that was never actually there, her sister told me. She won't stop crying and asking what she was thinking. The irony was perfect. She'd sacrificed a 12-year marriage for closure with a guy who couldn't handle even the slightest bit of drama or responsibility. 8 months after our divorce was finalized, I thought I was completely done with Melissa's drama, but she had one final performance planned. I was coming home from dinner with Rebecca, the veterinarian I'd been dating for 3 months, when I found Melissa sitting on the steps outside my new apartment complex. She looked terrible, 20 pounds thinner, hollow-eyed, wearing clothes that hung off her like she'd borrowed them from someone bigger. In her hands was a handwritten letter that looked like it had been folded and unfolded dozens of times. "Jake, please, I need you to read this," she said, standing up shakily when she saw me. "I've been in therapy for 6 months, working through all the issues that made me sabotage our marriage." The letter was 5 pages of what sounded like therapeutic buzzwords mixed with desperate promises. She'd learned to value commitment over excitement. She understood the difference between healthy friendships and emotional affairs. She was willing to sign a post-nuptial agreement that would give me complete access to all her communications and whereabouts. "I know I don't deserve another chance," she said, tears streaming down her face, "but I'm not the same person who hurt you. I've done the work, Jake. Real work." Then came the revelation that made everything even more twisted. Dylan hadn't been the romantic figure from her past that she'd convinced herself he was. "He was recording our conversations," she said, her voice breaking. "The whole thing was research for some podcast he's creating about rekindling lost love. He never actually cared about me or wanted me back. He was just using me as content." The betrayal within the betrayal was almost funny, except for how completely it had destroyed whatever was left of her self-respect. Dylan had manipulated her the same way she tried to manipulate me, except he'd been even more calculated about it. "So you threw away our marriage for someone who was basically conducting a social experiment on you," I said quietly. "That's what I'm trying to tell you," she pleaded. "None of it was real. The only real thing I ever had was what we built together, and I destroyed it for nothing." I looked at this broken woman who'd once been my wife, who'd shared 12 years of my life, and felt nothing but exhausted pity. "The problem wasn't Dylan," I told her. "The problem was that you were willing to sacrifice our marriage for external validation and excitement. It could have been anyone." She started to argue, but I held up my hand. "You didn't leave me because Dylan was special. You left me because you thought I wasn't enough. That's what you need to understand." When she offered to sign legal documents promising complete transparency, I explained what she still didn't get. Trust isn't something you can reconstruct with contracts and surveillance, Melissa. Once it's broken, it's broken. I walked toward my apartment building, leaving her standing there with her letter and her promises. Through my window, I watched her sit back down on the steps and cry for another 20 minutes before finally getting in her car and driving away. The next morning, Rebecca asked if I was okay, and I realized that I genuinely was. The woman crying outside my building had been a stranger to me, someone whose pain I could acknowledge without feeling responsible for fixing. 2.5 years later, I'm sitting in my home office of the house Rebecca and I bought together, working on a consulting project that's about to net me more than I made in my best year of marriage to Melissa. My business took off after the divorce, partly because I finally had the mental energy to focus on building something meaningful instead of managing someone else's emotional chaos. Rebecca and I got engaged 6 months ago, and the difference between planning a future with someone who actually wants to be there versus someone who's constantly looking for exit strategies is remarkable. She's never once made me feel like I need to prove my worth or compete for her attention. When I proposed, her first reaction was genuine joy, not calculations about what kind of ring she could show off to her friends. Last week, Marcus called with an update I hadn't asked for but found oddly satisfying. Dylan's podcast series had been released, titled Second Chances, When High School Love Gets a Reboot, and it featured detailed recordings of his conversations with Melissa without her knowledge or consent. The fallout was spectacular. Melissa lost her job when colleagues recognized her voice in the episodes, her friends stopped talking to her when they heard how she described them in private conversations with Dylan, and her parents were mortified when neighbors started asking if they'd heard their daughter on that relationship exploitation podcast. She's been unemployed for 8 months now, living back in her childhood bedroom, and according to mutual friends, she spends most of her time scrolling through social media looking at photos of the life she used to have. Meanwhile, Rebecca and I just got back from a trip to New Zealand, something I never could have afforded while subsidizing Melissa's lifestyle and dealing with her manufactured crises. We're talking about kids, maybe getting a dog first, building the kind of stable, happy life that Melissa would have found boring but that feels like luxury to me now. The irony isn't lost on me that the woman who left me for not being exciting enough is now living the most mundane existence possible, while I'm having adventures with someone who appreciates quiet Sunday mornings as much as she does international travel. I learned that self-respect isn't negotiable, and that men who know their worth don't bargain with people who devalue their marriage. Some people are worth waiting for, others aren't worth fighting for, and the difference becomes crystal clear when you stop accepting less than you deserve. Melissa taught me what I don't want in a partner, and Rebecca showed me what I'd been missing all along. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having someone walk away who was never really there to begin with.